The cantina's lights flickered in rhythm with the hum of the gas giant's orbit outside, casting long, wavering shadows across the uneven floor. The patrons were a mix of smugglers, traders, and spacefarers, their conversations buzzing like the soft static of distant radio signals. At a corner table sat a woman who didn't quite belong. Her hair fell like a silver curtain over her shoulders, catching the neon glints from the hovering signs above. Her ears, long and tapering delicately toward the ceiling, twitched occasionally, as if detecting some frequency invisible to the rest of the room. She held a drink in one hand, green liquid glowing faintly, and stared at the shifting crowd without truly seeing it. No one dared approach her. The way she carried herself, poised yet coiled like a spring, made the air around her feel charged. He noticed her immediately, not for her long ears or the lethal aura that even the drunk seemed to sense, but because she was alone. Most people avoided loneliness in a cantina like this. It was considered poor form, bad luck, and frankly, socially suicidal. He was a human soldier who had survived more scrapes than he cared to admit, mostly thanks to dumb luck and the occasional improbable maneuver. Today, his luck nudged him toward her. He stepped over the uneven floor panels, narrowly avoiding a floating hollow advertisement for a synthetic protein drink that had a tendency to misfire. The green glow from her drink illuminated her face in a way that made her appear almost ethereal, like one of those historical portraits the station museum insisted on displaying for alien anthropologists. He hesitated, half expecting to be vaporized by a glance, then cleared his throat. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, attempting casualness that came off more like a nervous cough. She didn't answer immediately, just tilted her head slightly, one long ear flicking like a radar dish. He smiled nervously. "I promise I'm not on the menu, unless your menu is sarcasm. I'm a bit bitter, but I come with a side of terrible jokes." Her eyes narrowed, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Do humans really joke before they die, or is this some universal survival tactic? She asked, voice soft, almost musical, but with an edge that suggested a sharpened blade hidden behind the words. "I wouldn't know," he said, shrugging. "Mostly I try to live long enough to annoy people with my jokes." Her smirk widened slightly, and for a fraction of a second, the lethal tension in her posture eased. He sat down opposite her, careful not to invade her personal space, though it was difficult to judge the boundaries around someone who could probably dislocate his arm in less time than it took to finish a drink. The cantina hummed around them, waiters buzzing past on anti-gravity pads, their trays wobbling dangerously with liquids that seemed only slightly concerned with Newtonian physics. A bartender robot hovered nearby, scanning orders and occasionally muttering in a mechanical voice that sounded suspiciously like sarcasm. "Another drink for the potentially dead one." "So," she said finally, "you're a human soldier. I suppose you've killed things before?" Her tone was neutral, but the question hung in the air like a graviton pulse, subtle and heavy. "Depends on what you call killing," he said with a grin that came out too eager. "Mostly I've just rearranged the molecular structure of a few unlucky aliens by accident." She blinked slowly, one ear twitching. "Accidentally lethal humans are rare," she commented. "Most prefer to plan thoroughly." "I'm more of a wing it type," he said. "Strategy is overrated. Besides, nothing beats improvisation when the universe decides to laugh at your plans." He gestured vaguely at a floating hollow advertisement that had spun itself into a knot. "See that? That's my whole battle philosophy summarized in one failed hologram." She tilted her head again, and a genuine laugh escaped her, short, sharp, and startlingly human. He flinched slightly, unsure if it was allowed to hear laughter from someone who had probably ended more lives before breakfast than he had in his entire career. "You humans are absurd," she said, finally settling back in her chair. Her fingers brushed the rim of the glowing drink, and the liquid rippled as if aware of her touch. "Always smiling at danger, never taking it seriously until it takes you seriously." "I find humor helps," he admitted. "Mostly because if I stared at danger too long, it would stare back. And frankly, some things are too absurd not to laugh at, like alien assassins sitting alone in corner tables, glowing drinks, and robots with bad attitudes." She studied him, head tilted, ears flicking like antennae picking up signals he couldn't see. "And you," she asked, "why are you here talking to someone who could kill you without blinking?" "Because," he said, leaning back with exaggerated carelessness, I have a policy of annoying dangerous beings until they reconsider killing me. And maybe because you looked bored, which is tragic, someone with your skill stuck with a glowing drink and bad music. I mean the injustice of it all. Her smirk returned, this time less guarded, more amused. You humans really have no fear of death, do you? I have fear, he said quickly. I just prefer to dress it up in bad jokes so it doesn't look like I'm panicking. He gestured to his own ears, not that humans had any remarkable features in that department, but it was a gesture meant to mimic her subtle ear movements, and she tilted her head at him like he had just made a bizarre offering. You're persistent, she said, annoyingly persistent. I'll take that as a compliment, he said with a shrug. Most humans would have left by now, or fainted, or both, but not me. I like a challenge. Especially if it comes with long ears and a dangerous glare. She leaned back, one hand brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the other idly spinning her drink so that the green liquid shimmered like liquid emerald. Most challenges end poorly, she said, for the challenger. Yeah, but most humans get a thrill out of bad odds, he replied. It's like gambling with the universe, except the chips are your limbs. She laughed again, quieter this time, almost inaudible. The tension that had clung to her like armor began to shift, subtle but undeniable. Around them, the cantina continued its chaotic rhythm, a mix of laughter, argument, and the occasional spill of anti-gravity drinks. But in this corner, amidst glowing liquids and humming machinery, a fragile connection had begun, built from awkward humor, reckless curiosity, and the unexpected comfort of someone willing to sit at the table. Fine, she said finally, leaning forward slightly, ears tilting with interest. You may stay, but only because I'm curious how long your bad jokes can survive a conversation with me. He grinned, leaning back and pretending to wipe imaginary sweat from his brow. Challenge accepted, and if I die, you can at least say my jokes died in style. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a relaxed smile. And in that moment, the universe seemed just a little less hostile, one clumsy human soldier at a time. He ordered another drink, careful not to let the floating tray wobble too much, though the robot waiter seemed determined to test his balance every time it passed. She watched him with one eyebrow raised, her long ears twitching like finely tuned antennas, catching the hum of the station's gravity stabilizers and the faint pulse of electromagnetic signals that humans usually couldn't detect. You really don't seem afraid, she said, swirling the green liquid in her glass until it reflected the strobing lights above like liquid emerald stars. I have fear, he admitted, leaning forward and lowering his voice. But fear's boring if it's just fear. I like to mix it with jokes, awkward conversation, and the occasional poorly timed hover spill. Keeps life interesting. Her smirk returned, this time more amused than skeptical. So you survive by being ridiculous. Mostly, he said with a shrug. Either that or I'm incredibly lucky, which I suspect is the universe's way of punishing me later. He gestured at the cantina's ceiling where a maintenance drone whizzed past, trailing a cloud of microgravity sparks. See that? That drone almost disintegrated a table last week. I walked by like a complete fool and lived. That's my kind of luck. You humans really are absurd, she said, shaking her head though her eyes glimmered with curiosity. I've seen things, fought things, killed things, none of them expected laughter. Well, laughter's underrated in survival, he said. It distracts your opponents, or at least confuses them long enough for you to run, which is a survival skill in its own right. She leaned back slightly, considering him with a sharper gaze. And have you ever fought an assassin before? Once, he admitted, leaning back and waving a hand dismissively. Ended poorly, mostly for the assassin. I tripped over my own boots, smacked him in the face with a hollow tablet and ran screaming. Victory by accidental concussion, that's my specialty. Her smirk widened, but it didn't reach her eyes entirely. There was something in the way he spoke, the clumsy bravery, that piqued her interest. Humans were usually either too arrogant or too cautious. This one, he teetered on the edge of both. She found it strangely compelling. You talk too much, she said, sipping her drink. The liquid glowed softly against her fingers, illuminating the subtle ridges along the length of her ears. And you joke at inappropriate times. How do you not die immediately? Practice, he said with mock solemnity. And also, some of us get lucky enough to annoy the universe into leaving us alone for a bit. Besides, he added with a grin, If everyone serious died instantly, we'd have no one to make fun of, and that would be a tragedy. She tilted her head, one ear brushing against the rim of the chair. I've killed hundreds, most died silently, efficiently. You'd be entertaining to watch, I suspect. Entertaining is my middle name, he said. Not really, it's Kevin. But entertaining should be on my license plate. She laughed, a sound that seemed impossible to mix with lethal intent but somehow did. Around them, the cantina carried on with its chaotic hum. A group of mech mercenaries argued over holographic dice, a trader tripped over a floating crate of exotic fruit, and a tiny AI cat floated past, chasing a nanobot moth. It was absurd and alive, and for once the deadliness she carried didn't feel like the only thing defining her. You really think talking can change anything? She asked, more quietly now. Her fingers tapped the edge of her glass, sending ripples across the glowing surface. I've never needed conversation, only precision. I think conversation is underrated, he said, leaning closer. Especially when it involves someone with glowing drinks, sensitive ears, and a skill set that could make me lunch if I'm not careful. Conversation's cheaper than therapy and less lethal than being on the wrong side of a plasma blade. Her smirk softened into something that almost resembled trust. You're oddly persistent for a human, she said, and you don't seem to notice danger creeping closer every time we speak. Danger is overrated, he said, leaning back dramatically, letting a hollow advertisement float between them like a miniature shield. Besides, I have you to keep things interesting, and judging by your glare, that's a good thing for me. She allowed herself a small laugh, quiet but genuine, as a group of gravity-defying bottles tumbled past them, narrowly missing his head. You're lucky, she said, and reckless but entertaining. He grinned. Entertainment is my gift to the galaxy. Mostly unwanted, occasionally appreciated, like a space mosquito but less itchy. She raised a brow. Space mosquito. Yeah, he said, annoying, persistent, survives in extreme conditions. Kind of like me but without the wings or the bite, mostly the annoying part though. The conversation shifted naturally after that, lightening the tension further. He told her stories of far-off planets where gravity shifted unpredictably, causing entire cities to float upside down for hours. She told him of missions where she had to disable security drones while balancing on magnetic rails in zero gravity, narrating it dryly but with flashes of humor in her tone that caught him off guard. Each story was interspersed with laughter, small jabs, and impossible scenarios that somehow felt believable within the cantina's chaotic sci-fi rhythm. Humans make terrible assassins, she said at one point, her long ears twitching as if catching some subtle vibration in the air. You improvise too much, panic at the wrong moments, and laugh when silence is required, but you survive. Exactly, he said proudly. Improvisation, panic, laughter, my three survival skills, and sometimes sheer dumb luck. She studied him for a long moment. Perhaps it is this absurdity that allows you to exist in proximity to death without succumbing to it. I like to think it's my charm, he said, raising a finger as if giving a solemn oath. But sure, absurdity works too. The green glow from her drink reflected in his eyes, creating the illusion that he was staring into a tiny, serene nebula. He noticed the way her ears twitched with her subtle amusement, and how her usual controlled demeanor softened in reaction to his clumsy storytelling. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that not every human she encountered would be either a threat or a nuisance. Some could be oddly compelling, irritating, and maybe even worth talking to. Fine, she said, leaning back in her chair and letting a strand of hair fall across her face. You may continue with your stories, but beware, they are dangerous in their own way. Dangerous stories? He asked, feigning horror. That's my specialty. Shall I add a bad pun to really seal the risk factor? She laughed again, this time louder, shaking her head. You are impossible. And yet, he said with a grin, here I am, still alive, still talking, still annoying the most skilled assassin in the quadrant. Victory! Her laughter softened the edge of the cantina's usual chaos. The drifting holograms, the clumsy patrons, the hovering drinks, all of it became a backdrop to a fragile, unfolding trust. She realized that maybe, just maybe, a human soldier could be tolerated. Not for long, probably, but long enough for conversation to matter. And if I die from your stories? She asked, still smiling. You won't, he said confidently, though there was a flicker of truth in the nervous grin. I'm very persuasive and persistent and okay, mostly lucky, but you'll live to be amused another day. That's my guarantee. Her smirk lingered, but it held warmth now, a subtle acknowledgement that their improbable connection had begun. He leaned back, feigning exhaustion from his own jokes, while she stirred her drink slowly, the glow reflecting her long, delicate ears. In the chaos of the cantina, amid floating bottles and robotic waiters, the beginnings of trust and curiosity flourished, fragile but undeniable, like a tiny star emerging in the void. He glanced around the cantina, noting the familiar chaos with a sense of fondness now. The floating hollow menus blinked erratically above tables, the anti-gravity trays wobbling as always, and a group of mech mercenaries argued over the merits of interstellar card games with more fervor than any diplomatic summit. In the corner, she sat with her usual poise, green drink glowing faintly in her hand, long ears twitching as if attuned to frequencies beyond the human range. But the expression on her face was softer, less guarded, hinting at amusement instead of the calculating lethality that had marked her since his first awkward approach. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "do you always sit alone, glowing drinks in hand, terrifying everyone within a 10-meter radius, or is this a special occasion?" She raised an eyebrow, one ear flicking toward him like a finely tuned sensor. "It's usually just practical," she said. "Efficiency, solitude minimizes errors. I've learned the hard way that company often complicates matters." "Ah, so I'm just a lucky complication," he said with a grin. "I should feel honored." She smirked, her laughter soft but genuine. "Perhaps, though I would prefer a less reckless complication." He leaned closer, elbows on the table, adopting the posture of a strategist planning a campaign of pure nonsense. "Reckless has its charm. Think of me as a test of your patience and maybe a small, annoying reward for your endurance. Besides, you've tolerated my stories, my jokes, and my general clumsiness for days now. Surely I deserve some acknowledgement for that." Her eyes flicked to the floating holo display above the bar, which was advertising a zero-gravity dance competition on a nearby colony. "You humans truly lack self-preservation," she said with mock exasperation, "and yet somehow you survive. Mostly through charm and bad timing," he said, "and occasionally by sheer accident, but surviving is just the start. Thriving now, that's an art." For the first time, she considered the notion seriously. Surviving missions, eliminating threats, maintaining precision, those had been her art forms, but thriving, that had always seemed frivolous, unnecessary. Until he had a way of twisting her world just enough to make her question the rigidity of her own life without breaking her control entirely. "You talk too much," she said softly, almost contemplatively. "And you joke at moments that should be silent, and yet I find myself listening." "That's because my words are like interstellar seasoning," he said. "Sprinkle them over a deadly alien assassin and suddenly life tastes less lethal." She chuckled, and it was warm this time, full-bodied, without the usual undercurrent of danger. "You are infuriatingly human," she said. "But I see now that perhaps some aspects of humanity are not entirely useless." "See," he said, raising a finger triumphantly. "Progress, you just admitted that humans have some redeeming qualities." She tilted her head, considering him. "Perhaps you have persistence for one and absurd courage. And I suppose a certain charm, dangerous in its own way." "Dangerous is my specialty," he said. "I practice it daily, but today I think I might have upgraded to delightful danger." Her ears twitched at the word, and she allowed herself the smallest smile, the first in a week that hadn't been calculated or defensive. "Delightful," she echoed. "I might allow it." Their conversation flowed, interspersed with laughter and small, absurd observations about the cantina. The anti-gravity drinks that refused to obey physics, the robot bartender who had begun giving unsolicited advice, and the AI cat chasing its own holographic tail. Every moment was mundane yet extraordinary, ordinary yet deeply intimate. "You know," he said, leaning closer, "I think this connection, whatever it is, has changed me." "How so?" she asked, curiosity in her tone. "I notice things I wouldn't have before," he said. "I pay attention to details, the way your ears twitch, the way you tilt your head when you're amused, how you exist in ways I never thought someone like you would allow. I've learned patience, observation, appreciation, I guess, for moments, for life, and for people I never expected to matter." She was silent for a long moment, swirling her drink. And I, she said finally, have reconsidered isolation. I have relied on solitude for survival, but I see now that connection, however fragile or absurd, has its value. You have changed my perspective. Not my skill, not my efficiency, but my view of living beyond missions and survival. He grinned, a little awkwardly, unsure if the honesty made him more vulnerable or braver. That's called growth, he said. And yes, it's terrifying, but in a good way. Think of it as interspecies evolution right here in a corner of a cantina. She tilted her head, ears twitching, and a genuine, broad smile spread across her face, softening the sharpness that had defined her for so long. Interspecies evolution, she repeated. I suppose I can accept that for now. He leaned back and feigned a dramatic sigh of relief. Victory, humanity prevails once again by wit, charm, and sheer ridiculousness. She laughed, low and melodic, shaking her head at his theatrics. Around them, the cantina buzzed on, oblivious to the subtle transformation taking place in its corner. Their bond had begun in humor, persisted through curiosity, and now solidified in trust, warmth, and mutual understanding. She realized she could allow someone into her life, even if only cautiously, and he recognized that beneath her lethal precision, there was space for companionship, laughter, and even vulnerability. Promise me, she said, leaning forward, that your absurdity will continue, that no matter what happens, you'll remain inconveniently human. I promise, he said with a grin, to be inconvenient, clumsy, reckless, and occasionally brilliant. All in the service of interstellar friendship, and maybe more. She studied him for a long moment, ears flicking, then nodded. Very well, then perhaps this arrangement is worth exploring. A nearby floating tray toppled, spilling luminescent drinks across the floor, narrowly missing them both. They both laughed, unbothered, the absurdity of the universe brushing against them lightly instead of crushing them. The moment was perfect in its imperfection, fleeting yet enduring, and it felt like a beginning, even as the station's orbit continued its relentless